Okay, everybody. And you still coming online, I think. And there we go. So it's 8:30, so it's time for the 8:30 live. Pull up a chair, settle in by the fireplace. I'm going to start sharing the link for this while folks begin tuning in, because it takes a minute for the live to propagate. Now, I've been thinking about doing this from my Facebook page instead of from my personal Facebook, but I don't know if that's better or worse, like how that would work with like notifications. What I will say is thanks to Jason Clark, I am wearing a different sweater because he was like, every time I see you, you're wearing the same thing. It is just a TV show, but since I do want another that's similar to, but not the same as the other sweater, Jason Clark, this is for you. I am wearing something different tonight. So let me just get this thing shared so that we can move on. There is so much that happened today. Literally, it's the beginning of the month. And I think that what happens is all of the news folks, they like hold off the news from last month until the beginning of the next month so that I click all the links and I use up all of my free articles for the month, like in a day, like in the first week of the new month, because that's what's happening. So much stuff went down today and there's just so much reporting. It's absolutely nuts. Now, I wonder sometimes whether or not I should even bother to talk about the news, because by all rights, you should be able to find it on the internet or get it from slightly less reputable sources than me, like, the lying fake news media. I kid. They are somewhat real. But, I wonder about it. But we're going to go over the headlines because that's what we do. And then when people offer questions and comments, I'll deal with them then. Anywho, the sharing is done. Let's get to it because there's a lot that there is a lot that happened today. I guess first I'm trying to just really like it's shortest to longest discussions. I mean, shortest thing is probably that Trump's valet has coronavirus. Now, the bigger question is, Trump has a valet? And the answer is yes, Trump has a valet. And it's very Downton Abbey. This is the person who brings him food and I guess picks out his ties in the morning, although I imagine his ties are just the longest strip of red fabric that a person can find. But the point is, Trump's valet has coronavirus, and I am very, very much counting on Donald Trump to make that man work and not wear a mask. Although, if the reports are accurate at all, it is said that the president flipped the F out and got really upset that his staff was not doing everything it possibly could, not doing enough to protect him from the virus, which I'd say it's hypocritical. I'd say it's ironic, but it's not. It's like exactly Donald Trump. Just everybody else go back to work and don't wear a mask to keep the economy going and make me look good. And I will stay bunkered down. And I expect everybody to keep me safe. So whatever. That happened. It's amusing-ish. And who knows? If he sends that dude home or makes him wear a mask, it's going to be, I don't know, news for some of us, but probably not for most of us. Well, not for the people who we're trying to reach with the narrative that, wearing masks is important. All right. So the next thing that's decently quick to go over is the fact that, guess what, friends? In the month of May, we might be experiencing a gigantic winter storm, a huge cold snap, which is being billed as, quote, historic. Now, pretty much everything that's happened in the last, everything in the last year has been historic, and everything in the last, say, 5 years, climate-wise, has been pretty historic. The hottest summers, the warmest winters, all of these weather phenomena have been pretty historic. But this being tacked on to everything else in 2020 would be pretty darn crappy, because the Northeast getting hammered by a snowstorm in mid-May is, 1, uncommon, 2, unpleasant, and 3, just piling on to all of the unpleasantness that is 2020. Now, I think the most important thing to understand about this is that, I think we've crossed the tipping point of making the climate warm, right? The 2020 really is the first year that people are beginning to realize that things are not going the way they have always gone. And that's just how tipping points work, honestly. You keep doing a thing, keeps going in a direction, and you don't feel it until bang, all of a sudden you fall off the cliff and things are different. So yeah, we've had like warm winters. We had that Christmas day that was 70 degrees, but people don't really register that because they're not negative things. Now we've had fires in Australia, droughts in California. We're going to get a snowstorm in May, potentially. You've got global pandemics, which, yes, are promoted by global warming and a more densely populated planet. And you've got the migration of species, such as the murder hornet, making its way from one climate to another, one region to another. So this is, I think, just driving home the fact that things are going to be different. And I think it's okay to mourn the fact that things are not going to be the same anymore, and that the old ways are gone, and that the old economy is gone, and that our old happily consuming ways of being is dead. And it's okay to mourn that, but I think we should also understand that getting through this grieving process is going to be important because the old ways are not returning, and either they die or we do. So there's that. And then, of course, the last piece being that when you plant food and you expect for spring to come, and then you expect for the plants to bloom and grow and then produce things like flowers and food, and you introduce a drastic cold snap, it kills them all, and that ruins harvests. Anyway, just an aside to the fact that, yeah, the weather might get bad in May, but it could have real consequences for agriculture, which are not things that we talk about. But since we're already in a situation where the food supply is, where the food supply chain rather is somewhat on teetering ground, this could, I don't want to say be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but it could add even more uncertainty and problems into the supply chain for agriculture. Anyway, whatever. Moving on to the next big thing that happened, because there's just so many things coming out. Breaking news, Mike Flynn is off. The Department of Justice decided not to continue prosecuting its case against him. So in case you forgot who Mike Flynn was Donald Trump's first pick for National Security Advisor. He is what's his rank? I think he's a general in the Army. And he had been caught out meeting with Russian Ambassador Kislyak and attending conferences for RT, Russia Today, in Russia. Now, maybe you remember him, maybe you don't, but what ended up happening was the FBI confronted him about these meetings. He lied about these meetings. He got caught in the lie about the meetings and about his lobbying work for Turkey. The Department of Justice, Mueller, in the Mueller investigation, went after him, caught him out on the lie, found out that he was lying. Mike Flynn pled guilty twice to the lying and to these federal crimes, and turned on a bunch of other people, and was the first weakness in the Trump administration. Trump distanced himself, removing him from his position of National Security Advisor, and now, after this, what are we in? Year 3 of this saga, because 3.5 because the didn't start until the administration had gotten underway. But now we're in year 3.5 of this saga, and the Department of Justice is just asking for the charges to be dismissed. Why? Well, a few irregular things happened, and then one thing which is the basis for it. So first, the irregular thing is the Attorney General hired an independent investigator to look into Mike Flynn's case. And this is unusual because the government is prosecuting the case against Mike Flynn, not defending Mike Flynn, but they hired an independent investigator to review the case. And that independent investigator came back with the idea that Mike Flynn had been set up effectively by the FBI. And what does this mean? Well, essentially, the line of questioning, they're arguing that the line of questioning posed to Flynn during the FBI investigation was not materially connected to the crimes that he committed. And as a result, his crimes against the United States, the mishandling of that investigation, the decision of the FBI to effectively go and question him on things they weren't supposed to be questioning him on makes the case invalid. It's sort of like a habeas corpus case or a Miranda rights case, where because the process was wrong, the case should be dismissed. Whether or not this person is actually guilty is sort of irrelevant. If law enforcement did not do the right thing, if they mishandled the process, then that case can't be prosecuted. Now, the government has moved to dismiss. Their chief prosecutor on this quit the day before the announcement came out, possibly because he thinks this is bullshit, but who knows. The ultimate end result of this is that the judge now has to decide whether to dismiss. If the judge decides to dismiss, then Mike Flynn will basically be cleared of these charges and cannot be tried again for, again, the crimes to which he already pled guilty. So he pled guilty and now he's going back on that. But if the judge agrees to dismiss, then Mike Flynn will have the benefit of the double jeopardy rules insofar as he can't be tried again for the same crimes. The judge could still order a hearing on why the case should be dismissed, but right now it's in limbo. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. So bam, we knocked out 3 things. What else is big? Oh, okay, here we go. I just wanted to mention this. Daily News today came out with an op-ed about the decision by Judge Annalisa Torres to reinstate the New York Democratic primary. And I'm not going to go again into why that Democratic primary, presidential primary, is important to hold. It has to do with the delegates. It has to do with the way the party operates. It has to do with a lot more than just who's going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. There are a lot of things that are important about the presidential primary. What I want to say is how Annalisa Torres, who I think made a great decision, and in her decision wrote a really, really intelligent and insightful, decision, which understood the importance of the delegate process and the functioning of the Democratic Party internally. I want to say how somebody like her becomes a federal judge, because one of the things that folks don't appreciate is the role that the Democratic Party, for example, plays in choosing who gets to be a judge and who doesn't be a judge. And obviously, who gets to be a judge makes a huge difference in some really, really big aspects of our lives. For many people, it's whether they go to jail, whether they have to pay money, whether they get to keep their children or live in their homes. But in this case, this affects the entire country. So how did Annalisa Torres become a federal judge? Well, she started off in New York civil court and then became a Supreme Court judge. Now, the Democratic Party of New York is effectively responsible for making judges, right? With almost no competition from Republicans, particularly for these unknown judicial elections, Democrats always win. The local county parties, like the county committee, plays a really important part in endorsing and nominating people for judgeship. For civil court, we have elections, and it matters who the Democrat is. For Supreme Court, we have elections but no primaries. And so through a pretty archaic process known as the Judicial Convention, party leaders determine who will get to be the Democratic candidate for Supreme Court. Now, liberals, progressives, like Paul Newell, a good friend of mine who's a district leader, that is to say, he's on the county committee and even in leadership of the county committee, he supported Annalisa Torres for Supreme Court. This is how a judge like Annalisa Torres gets on the radar of a president like Barack Obama. Barack Obama then elevated Judge Torres from the New York State Supreme Court into the federal judiciary. And that is how you get judges like this. It all starts with good local elected officials and good local party representatives. And Judge Annalisa Torres, understanding this, applied that knowledge to her decision on why the New York State presidential primary should proceed, because the delegates that go to the convention are very much like the local party representatives that helped make her a judge. And if you don't let people vote for those delegates, if you don't let people vote for their party leadership, you don't get good outcomes. Because ultimately, the political parties are two of the most important and powerful political institutions in our country. And saying that you can have a true democracy without maintaining the openness of the party democracies, because they're, again, internal party democracies which elect county committee members, elect district leaders, elect state committee members, and yes, elect people like judges. Without maintaining the openness of those processes, you can't really have a full democracy in this country. The two major parties are just too powerful and important. In any event, I thought it was very important to understand how a judge like Torres becomes a judge in the first place, because it all goes through the Democratic, and in some place, depending on which party is dominant where you live, it all goes through the party system. And by ensuring that you have a good, strong local party and activism around it and activists in it, you ensure that you get good judges. And people don't vote in judicial elections. Most judicial elections aren't even contested. But by getting good judges in lower courts, that's how you end up with good judges at the federal level. And the last thing I'll say about the judiciary is, in some regards, it's under assault by Donald Trump, who's been filling hundreds of vacant federal judicial positions because Republicans refuse to let Barack Obama fill any of them. We spoke about this yesterday. But Trump's nominees all come out of nowhere, and many of them are completely unqualified. No fewer than 4 have removed themselves from consideration because after light questioning by the Senate, they were simply found to be completely incompetent. So, that's the story of Judge Analisa Torres. Now, another thing that came out today. Apparently, the CDC has prepared, a great 17-page guide for reopening the country. Unfortunately, it will never see the light of day because apparently, when it was submitted to the White House, this administration sent it freedom to businesses to reopen, to restart the economy, nor to faith-based institutions for their congregations to meet. Ultimately, the administration's position is that there should be, no limitations on congregating for businesses or wearing masks or what have you, or on the capacity of faith-based institutions to meet. So, yeah, I think we're just kind of stuck with the president's 14-point plan for reopening the economy, which honestly isn't great, but it could be worse. And that worst thing that it could be is states completely disregarding it, which is what they're doing. No state has achieved phase 1 of the president's plan. Sorry, it's not a 14-point plan. It's a plan, and the first phase is go 14 days with reduced infection rates and death tolls. And no state has accomplished that, and lots of states are reopening. So, the CDC produced a plan, but even if the administration had adopted it, the president would quickly undermine it with calls to reopen, and then states would quickly abandon it just because. But I want you to know that it's entirely reasonable and feasible to create a plan that does work because South Korea did it. South Korea, as you've probably heard, had its first COVID case on the same day as the United States. And while we now have like 70,000 people with coronavirus, 75,000, they quickly got their infection rate under control and are now adding fewer than 10 infected people per day. So hats off to South Korea. And some people will say things like, yeah, well, South Korea has a whole different culture and a Confucian blah, 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 where they listen to the government and this, that. Yeah, the whole point is that the people in Korea realize that there was a problem, and it's not some crazy culture. It's not some crazy nonsense. They've got a democracy out there. It's just that instead of getting pissed off about how wearing masks takes away their freedoms, they said, why don't we try this for a few months and see how it goes? And guess what? It went pretty goddamn well. But it's just not for the United States. That's fine. And it's not for the United States because of things like Plandemic. Now, I don't know if you know about this thing. Plandemic is the latest really well-produced conspiracy documentary. So I watched like the first 25 minutes of it, but at 2x speed. So it took me like 10 minutes to get the gist of this thing. But Plandemic is really a conspiracy theory in the form of a documentary, which hinges mainly on a single person, Judy Mikovits. Now, before I get into her, I will say that Big Think did a debunking of Plandemic point by point. And so if you want to see this on my Facebook, you can go check it out. But the scientist that they use, that they interview, Judy Mikovits, she was somebody who was, well, let's just say she's discredited. She is a real PhD, but maybe not a real scientist. She was big in the early part of the 2000s. She did research that linked chronic fatigue syndrome to a disease carried by mice. This caused really, really big news, and it led a lot of people to take HIV retrovirals because the mouse disease, which she linked to chronic fatigue syndrome, was caused by a retrovirus. But it came out, unfortunately, that her entire study was faulty. Nobody could replicate her results. The paper she produced was partially retracted by her and then fully retracted by the publication in which she had placed it. So her research was then completely debunked. The faultiness of the research was traced back to contamination of her lab, so basically bad lab procedures. And then when she was fired from her lab, she was accused of stealing the research and the notes and her equipment, which led to her arrest. And if you watch Plandemic, it says that she was arrested because she wouldn't keep her mouth shut about the truth, whatever that truth was, and for speaking out against Anthony Fauci, who at the time was director of the NIH. This is not true. If you look at the police reporting and the news reporting, it is because she was accused of taking things from the lab. Whether or not she ultimately did do that, I actually don't know the answer to that, but it had nothing to do with not being quiet. And the best way to look at this is to just go read the New York Times article, which was written in 2012, long before there was a huge conspiracy to spread coronavirus, to take away our rights, and restrict our freedom not to wear masks. So, I always love it when there are these things that you can go look up that are completely unrelated to the current situation, that corroborate or undermine, I just say, the conspiracy theories being put forward. So yes, this person, Judy Mikovits, is a PhD scientist. Yes, she was arrested. And yes, you can read that whole story from 2012, long before we arrived here, and get the true scoop that she was a discredited scientist, not some whistleblower. Okay, so the second to last thing I want to say is about this new Facebook Supreme Court of Content. I don't know if folks heard about this, but I just want everybody to know about it because it irks the bejesus out of me like every day. Facebook and YouTube and all this, of course, so much media traffics through them. And yes, of course, when they ban content that you don't like or think is bad, it's always a huge victory and a wonderful thing. But they are becoming arbiters of truth for many, many people, for large swaths of the population. And Facebook has just created what it calls its Supreme Court of Content, which is a panel of people, including some Nobel Prizes and what have you, who will adjudicate whether or not content is allowed to be spread. Now, of course, Facebook is a private company. It can set its own policies and do as it pleases. But given the fact that I view it as a media company, because it's so integral to the media environment and the way that information spreads. I really find this quite disconcerting. As far as I'm concerned, Facebook is listening in on everybody's conversations, and now it will be deciding whose conversations are valid and whose opinions are valid. And it is effectively, this tribunal is the high command of a secret police. I'm not a fan, and I've spoken many, many times about censorship and free speech and tech giants before, but this really just, sort of drives all that home. And the last thing I want to mention is the NYPD. Now, you might have heard that the subways are shutting down between 3 and 5 a.m. Now, and this is to disinfect and clean the trains. Well, check it out. There's all these homeless folks on the subways, and the workers who clean the trains, they're not paid, or it's not their job to deal with the homeless and remove them or provide social services. Now, there are people who are hired to provide social services and help homeless people. They're called social workers. But hiring a bunch of them would be a real pain in the butt. Instead, what politicians, particularly the politicians here in New York, like to do is hire a bunch more cops and pay these police officers to go and remove the homeless from the trains. Now, there is a huge cold snap coming, so this weekend we'll be using, and oh yeah, it's May already, I forgot. So yeah, there's a blizzard coming. So this weekend's supposed to be freezing, so we're going to be kicking out all these homeless folks of the subway during freezing weather, and they have nowhere to go. If you kick people out of the subway, where do you expect them to go? I guess just on the streets again. In any event, this is just sort of par for the course for our government, and in particular, our governor, who has for 10 years pined away and been battled back from all of his main objectives. Everything he started to do in 2008, 9, and 10, sorry, not 8 because he wasn't elected in 8. Well, he got elected in 8 and took office in 9, but everything he was trying to do in 2009, 10, and into 11 were all things that people had to battle back against. And honestly, for the most part, progressives did pretty well preventing them from doing a lot of them. And these were it was basically like, one, keeping his veneer super clean, even as he passed Republican agendas. 2, instigating private-public partnerships to solve basically every problem. People might remember this, but in his his first 2 years, Cuomo tried to privatize almost every part of the public. He wanted to privatize the Tappan Zee Bridge. He wanted to privatize a bunch of roads. It was ridiculous. His idea to fix everything was to get private money in there and then sell off New York's infrastructure. Another huge Andrew Cuomo wish list item: humiliate Bill de Blasio every day of the week. Now, some might argue that Bill de Blasio is doing this to himself, but big check there anyway. And then a big Andrew Cuomo dream was to have an entirely austerity budget, to make drastic cuts to New York's services and reduce taxes. And he's managed to do that. Now, instead of, having services and providing help to New Yorkers, he's arguing that the pandemic means we need $10 billion in cuts. $10 billion in cuts is exactly what he tried and failed to cut during the 2008, 9, 10 financial crisis. And he couldn't do it. He got battled back, and that's exactly where he is now. It took him 10 years to get there, but he's finally cutting $10 billion from the New York State budget. And then finally, he's wanted to put 1,000 cops in our subways for a long freaking time. And he's been trying to do it. He's been battled back. He's tried to send in state troopers to increase the number of police in New York City. It didn't really work out. And now here we are, 1,000 cops in the subways kicking out homeless people. I mean, way to go, Andrew Cuomo. You held on long enough, you found your opportunity, and you took it. So kudos to you. That's it. That's our show for tonight. I thank everybody who tuned in to watch. It's nice every so often not to go for an hour or so. Sometimes the comments are just fast and furious. But today it seems like a quiet night. There must be something on TV that I don't know about because I don't watch TV. But I am going to go watch Ozark while I eat some beans. But let's see if there's any comments that I missed. Julianne, most politicians would behave that way. That was probably in context to something else, or it definitely was, and I don't know what it was. But thank you. Okay, that's it. I'll see you all later. I'm excited to have dinner at a reasonable hour tonight. Or semi-reasonable. I don't know what time other people eat, but like 9's not bad for me.